Is Today I want to talk to you guys about, the power of breaking your word, the power of actually keeping your word. So, a lot of times we wonder why we don't trust ourselves. We wonder why we attract people that break their words, or we wonder why we're losing who we truly, authentically are. Well, there's three things that happens when you start to break the promises of keeping your word. Number one, you separate yourself from your authentic self. You separate, and what I mean by that, you separate yourself from your authentic self. I believe your authentic self is the truth about who you are. The more you break your words, the more you're separate from the truth of who you are. Because if you promise to do something and you break it, you literally are lying to yourself, and you've lied to yourself. So then what starts to happen is this disconnection from truth, disconnection from who you are. The second thing that happens with that, you start a conversation, a self-reflecting, I call it a self-reflecting conversation about your word to yourself. So you're starting to have this conversation. It's usually a discouraging conversation, like you're incapable, you can't do things. Remember the last time you said you're going to do this and you didn't do it? See, those conversation came from the first thing, that you were disconnected when you gave your word. So that conversation carries. The conversation will show up in different decision that you make, and then you start being really hesitant in making decision, become indecisive. But it all started with that conversation you first had when you first broke your word, and even from the point that you grew up. All right. And then the third thing that happens after you're separated from your truth, you are starting that self-reflection conversation. And the last thing you do, you start to shield from the long-term consequences of the impact that you have on others and yourself. You start to shield yourself from the long-term consequences of breaking your word. Once you do that, the problem with that, you also disconnect from the impact, from the pain, the cost that it costs you when you do break your word. So now it's like not a big deal. You say you're going to do something, you break it. You say you're going to show up, you don't. It's not a big deal. But what starts to happen, that conversation really creates and connects with your character. And then what you do is you communicate that character to other people. So now other people look at you and they start to judge you based on your word, which is self-fulfilling prophecy. I shouldn't trust people. People just don't trust me. I don't know why. I can't find a person that's committed to me. How about we commit to your own word? How about you reflect on that? So I'm going to give you three things that you can do to actually rebuild that trust, rebuild your word and your character and your reputation, right? Number one, we need to reconnect with the value of your word. Need to reconnect with the value of your word. Do you understand that your word really impacts you? Your word impacts people, but you also understand that your word connects to your name, like your word and your name, they go together. So yeah, back in the days, they had names that if you were part, like say the Wades, if you're part of that name, you're known to you have a reputation with that name, you have a pattern with that name. So either you're a liar with that name, or you are the truth seeker or truth teller with that name. So what value does your name have? When people look at you, when people talk about you, are you a person, a woman, or a man of their word? So think about that. So reconnect with the value and the power of your word. If you do that, then you will reestablish the conversation about your word, the self-conversation about your word. What do I mean by that? Remember I told you about the conversation that you may be having that's discouraging because it keeps track, your mind keeps track of how many times you've broken your word, and you get this critical person inside of you to remind you. So you also have another part of you inside of you to remind you how you kept your word, to remind you that you are a man or a woman of your word. So you have two people inside of you taking notes on the words that you speak, what you say, and what you do. So keep track of that. Reestablish the conversation so it could be an encouraging conversation versus a discouraging conversation. And my last point is review the consequences of the impact of your word. Review the consequences of the impact of your word before you give it. Before you give your word, count the cost. Listen, can I do this? So if you do that, when you commit to something, you're gonna have weight. Like when somebody says, "Hey," when you say you're gonna do something, you people will say, "I know I could count on them. I know I could count on her," because what they say is what they do. And when you do that, when the more you review the consequences of breaking your word, the consequences of giving your word, then what's going to happen? You're gonna go, "Oh wait, before I give my word, let me really count the cost. Let me really, do I really want to say yes or do I really want to say no to this thing?" If you do this, you're going to build that confidence inside of you. If you do this, you're going to build that commitment inside of you. If you do this, you're going to build a character inside of you. And guess what happens? Then you attract people that are just like you. You attract people that give their word. So now you're not frustrated. Remember, when you get frustrated, remember, hey, am I breaking my word like they are? Am I breaking my promise when they broke their promise? Don't be the first one to cast a stone and not thinking that you're okay. Just review these things, right? Review how you separate yourself from your own truth. Review how you started this conversation about your truth. Review and remember how you shield yourself. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Please do share. Thank you for being a part of this group, and I will talk to you later.